Alrighty, so for today, I wanted to go over my top 24 wide receiver rankings in fantasy football going into the 2025 season. So without further ado, we're going to hop right into it. Coming in at number one, kind of going chalk, but don't hate me, just hate the fact that he is arguably the best receiver in real football and fantasy football, and that is none other than Jamar Chase in the first slot. I don't anticipate the situation change for the Bengals. I think that defense is going to be exactly the same, maybe even a little bit worse if Trey Henderson does get moved. I anticipate the Bengals getting scored on a lot. They're going to have to score a lot of points. So Jamar Chase, T. Higgins are both going to be in a very similar situation that they were in last year. I would expect production to be roughly the same. He has the winning upside as a wide receiver. At wide receiver number 2, it is the first time I'm going to go off script and makes people upset and probably in some people's minds overrank. But at number 2, in my opinion, looking at the deep dive, analytics, stats, and film, Nico Collins is going to finish as wide receiver 2 in fantasy football. One thing to keep in mind for everyone out there who's not done fantasy football before, maybe you're new, maybe you've only drafted 1 or 2 times before. One thing to keep in mind, just because I have Nico Collins ranked as who I think will finish as the number 2 wide receiver in fantasy football, does not mean you need to draft him this high. Had Nico Collins stayed healthy last year, had the offensive line for the Texans not been god-awful, Nico Collins last season would have finished as a top 5 wide receiver in fantasy. This wouldn't even be a stretch for anybody. He's going as wide receiver number 8. I expect to see him as a top 2 to top 3 wide receiver in fantasy football in 2025. Coming in at number 3, going back to the chalk, I have Justin Jefferson. At this point in time, from Kirk Cousins to Sam Darnold, I kind of think that Justin Jefferson is just established himself as almost quarterback proof. The amount of offensive weapons and the offensive line on this team, I'm pretty sure that J.J. McCarthy is going to slide in right where Sam Darnold led off. You're going to see Justin Jefferson easily finish the league-winning upside top 3, top 5, worst-case scenario fantasy football wide receiver in 2025. At number 4, he was a little bit lower. He's now higher after the George Pickens trade. That is CeeDee Lamb. CeeDee Lamb, when there's actually a viable wide receiver number 2 on his team, is an elite fantasy football wide receiver. He's already an elite NFL receiver, but the issue is when he is pretty much the only target earner on his team, he tends to get bracket covered and double covered, which means that he does not score as many fantasy football points. I don't know if we're going to see a 2023 CeeDee Lamb. That's why I still have him at 4, is because there is that ceiling. I think we kind of saw more of what his floor was last year. I think with the addition of George Pickens, you're going to see a field-stretching guy who's going to allow CeeDee Lamb to have much more favorable coverages, especially underneath routes. So I'm kind of guessing somewhere between 2023, somewhere between 2024, CeeDee Lamb is a league-winning wide receiver that you should be drafting in your fantasy football drafts. He'll easily finish the top 5 guy, provided he stays healthy. At number 5, I have none other than Puka Nacua. I actually am not one of those people that thinks that the addition of Davante Adams is going to hurt Puka. I think, if anything, it's going to elevate his game. It'll be great to watch him alongside Davante Adams with an actual wide receiver, number 2 or 1B to his 1A, with Matt Stafford, this top 10 scoring offense for the Rams. So last season for Puka, for the games that he actually finished, so he didn't go out with an injury and or he did not get ejected from smacking somebody in the face, if he had stayed on the pace through the rest of the games, I think it was like 9 or 10 games last season, he would have finished as the wide receiver 2 or 3 in fantasy football, somewhere behind Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson. At number 6, with a little bit of disrespect because he's finished as a wide receiver 4 in PPR formats for the past 2 seasons, is Amon-Ra St. Brown. With the departure of Ben Johnson this coming season, I do anticipate seeing the Lions kind of regressing a little bit on offense. I think you're going to see that the guys that they trust on this team on the offense side of the ball are going to be featured even more. Meaning Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jahmyr Gibbs, Sam Laporta, I anticipate seeing them having career seasons, or at least getting close to where their ceiling season has been before in fantasy football in 2025, which is why I easily, comfortably have Amon-Ra at number 6 in my fantasy football wide receiver rankings. At number 7, so it is going to be none other than Brian Thomas Jr. and then followed right up by Malik Neighbors. Both these guys in their rookie seasons broke out. They were fantastic. They both were top 10 wide receivers in the PPR format. Both of them have league-winning upside. The reason why I have Brian Thomas slightly ahead of Malik Neighbors is quarterback play. I think with the addition of Liam Cohen as the head coach and play caller for the Jags, a healthy Trevor Lawrence, just a better overall offensive scheme, you're going to get the best out of Brian Thomas Jr. that you're going to possibly get. When it comes to Malik Neighbors, I'm not a fan of Russell Wilson. I don't know how long Russell Wilson will have the job. If he gets Jameis by week 4, then every week that Jameis is playing with Malik, he's going to be a top 3 wide receiver in fantasy football. If from there we progress to Jackson Dart, I don't necessarily know what we're going to get. I think Jackson Dart was a fine college quarterback, but I don't know how he's going to look in the NFL. So the unknown part of it, knowing what I've seen out of Trevor Lawrence when he hits a ceiling, I have to give the slight edge ever so slightly to Brian Thomas Jr. this coming season. But again, both these guys have easy, top 5, top 6, top 7, win you your league wide receiver upside going into 2025. From here, I think that there's a tier break, and I understand that between league winners, top 10, there's going to be more than 10 people. So going in the top 10 upside players, at number 9, I am going to have none other than A.J. Brown. When you look at deep dive stats, when you watch tape, when you look at the analytics, when you look at everything really, you make projections, all that stuff, A.J. Brown is an elite wide receiver in the real NFL. He is an elite fantasy football wide receiver. It's just the amount of targets, the amount of catches, the amount of touches he's going to get on the season that are his limiting factor. This coming season, I think due to the workload that Saquon had last season, we're going to see his production and workload get scaled back in 2025. I do not believe that you need to have an injury happen to Saquon for A.J. Brown to finish as the top 10 wide receiver in fantasy football. If Saquon goes down, man, oh man, he's the easiest top 10 wide receiver in fantasy football you've ever seen. It's like a light switch. If it is just a reduction in production and a reduction in touches for Saquon, A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith are going to be the recipients of those touches. A.J. Brown's the number 1 wide receiver for the Eagles. He is a dominant, just beast on the field. I like A.J. Brown so much. Easy place to rank him, easy spot to have, and that's why I have A.J. Brown as my wide receiver number 9. As my wide receiver number 10, I have Ladd McConkey. Ladd McConkey last season was actually somebody I drafted towards the end of my draft. I thought he looked great on tape. Amazing. He transitioned over to the NFL. He looked great there too. I think you're still going to see an elevated pass volume from Justin Herbert in 2025. I'm not worried about the running game and the defense killing the offensive production. The big thing for me and why I really can't rank Ladd higher, and I don't know if people are factoring this in, I would assume that they are. I think with his size, you saw he got injured last year. I think he's going to be slightly more injury prone, so that is why I have him as my wide receiver number 10. If he was a bigger guy, kind of like A.J. Brown, it would be a lot easier to have him in a league-winning upside position. But factoring that little bit of takeaway from him, I have him comfortably at number 10. At number 11, I have Drake London. Again, big thing for Drake London. When you watch tape, the guy looks great, looks explosive. The biggest thing for me is I'm not 100% certain of what we're going to get out of Michael Penix. I think he's a great talent, but I don't necessarily know how it's going to look as the season progresses and he actually gets to play a full sample set of 17 games this coming year. I still think Drake London is a crazy high talent. He's the number 1 wide receiver on this team. He's on an emerging team of the Falcons. At my wide receiver number 12, a guy who I have a lot of faith in is Garrett Wilson. The guy just got a new contract recently, so I am 100% in on Garrett Wilson. For this Jets team, I know they're going to want to run the ball a lot. I know they're going to want to play a lot of defense. The big thing for me, though, is that there is no other pass-catching competition on this team. It basically is going to be Justin Fields throwing to Garrett Wilson over and over and over again. He'll probably finish realistically as like a wide receiver 13, 14, but he has potential with the scheme, with Aaron Glenn coming over, with Justin Fields, with him being the primary target and pretty much the only target runner on this team to be a top 10 guy in fantasy football in 2025. So for my wide receiver 13, I have him a bit higher than a lot of people out there do. It is going to be none other than Devontae Adams. I know I have him before T. Higgins, but it is only by 1 spot. I have T. Higgins as my wide receiver 14. They're both in similar situations. They're going to be in top 10 scoring offenses this coming season. He's going to have Matt Stafford, so you're going to have an elevation in quarterback play, an elevation in offensive line play, and Sean McVay is kind of just a wonderkin and kind of a genius offensive play caller. These guys are the first 2 wide receiver 2s that I'm going to put on my rankings, and I think both of them have a chance to easily be top 15 guys, but barring injury, both of them are top 24, locked in, easy peasy, no question wide receivers in fantasy football for 2025. At my wide receiver number 15, I have Tyreek Hill. I know for some people I have him dramatically too high, and then for some people dramatically too low. I think the big thing for Tyreek Hill is that the departure of Jonnu Smith has allowed me to bump him up a decent chunk. Jonnu Smith was killing touches last year for this Dolphins team. It was basically him and Devon Achane, and everybody else could kick rocks. So that's my nice way of putting it. So this coming year, I think we're going to see a return to form for Tyreek. He's not going to be injured. He's going to be healthy. I know people will say out there when people show you their age, especially at the wide receiver position, you got to believe them. But I think Tyreek has a little bit of juice left in the tank. I'm not saying we're going to see 2023 Tyreek Hill being wide receiver number 2 overall in fantasy football, but I think we're going to see a decent return to form. I have faith that more touches are going to be funneled to him, some to Jalen Waddle, and a lot to Devon Achane in 2025. So for my next wide receiver at wide receiver 16, sorry, I'm laughing because people are going to think I'm insane right here. I know that there's a lot of trade rumors and trade talks. I think he gets an extension with the 49ers. At wide receiver 16, I have Juwan Jennings. When you look at his stats over his last 4 seasons with the 49ers, his yards per reception are pretty much the same every single season. They went slightly down last year because he had dramatically more receptions. He is a big reason for the success, as limited as it may have been for the 49ers last season. He will be wide receiver 1 going into 2025 for the 49ers. He is going to be a guy, like I mentioned earlier, who's going way later in your draft. So I'm not saying draft him this high, but he is somebody for me that I am having a hard time leaving any of my drafts without. I understand the concerns about Brandon Ayuk, but when is he realistically going to come back? When's he going to play? How high is his production going to realistically be with that injury? Same thing for Ricky Pearsall. I think he started to come on at the end of the season, but I think a lot of that had to do with Juwan Jennings having a lingering injury. So what I'm anticipating for next season is Juwan Jennings continuing in the same form as last season, having a whole offseason with Brock Purdy, building more of a relationship with Brock Purdy, and him cementing himself as the wide receiver 1 on this football team going in the next season. Now, if he gets traded between now and the beginning of the season, I'll have to readjust my rankings. But until then, I think he's going to get an extension and he's going to be the wide receiver 1 on this football team. So as my wide receiver number 17, I have Terry McLaurin. When it comes to Terry McLaurin, I believe he's going to be in a top 10 scoring offense next season, much like he was last year with the Commanders. I'm not worried about the contract problems. I'm not worried about his extension. I'm not worried about any of that. The biggest thing for me is that Terry McLaurin is going to be a year older. If you regressed his touchdowns to more of kind of like the average of what wide receiver 1s or 2s were getting last season, it would have dropped his production a decent amount. He would not have finished as high as he did. I think that Terry McLaurin still got a decent amount of juice. He's still going to have Jaden Daniels, still have Cliff Kingsbury. I think he's easily going to finish as a top 24 wide receiver this coming season. I know I have him a little bit lower than some people do, but for me, when you look at his deep dive analytics and his deep dive stats, it makes me a little bit more concerned about what his potential could be going into next season, even if he has all these positive things situationally going into 2025. So I have him ranked just a little bit lower than some people out there. At my wide receiver number 18, I know I have him a lot higher than a lot of people out there. That is none other than DJ Moore. If you look at DJ Moore's stats and film last year, as bad as some of the film was because Caleb Williams looked like booty, it wasn't very good. I anticipate seeing more of a return to what we saw in 2023 or 2022 with Justin Fields, where he was a top 12, top 15, one of the two, wide receiver in PPR formats. I think that's what we're going to get this year. DJ Moore, athletically, talent-wise, holistically speaking, as a wide receiver, will be the wide receiver 1. He will get the most targets. He's going to be on a Ben Johnson offense, which is exactly who the kind of people I want to target, people who have top 10 potential as far as scoring offenses go. So for me, I know DJ Moore is ranked a lot higher than for most people, but I confidently have in my top 24 wide receivers going into 2025 when you're really looking at the data and really looking at the tape. At my wide receiver number 19, I have JSN. I know I have JSN a few spots later than a lot of people do as well, so I guess I'm kind of like flip-flopping people around. The big thing for JSN that I'm not a fan of, I don't think he's a top 10 wide receiver in the NFL. I don't think he has top 10 upside as far as like his skill, talent, and abilities. So when it comes to not being a top 10 guy holistically, it makes me concerned for how you're going to look when there's nobody else on this team to really catch the football or threaten the defense deep. My other big issue, they talked about it all offseason from the coaches, from the head coach to the new play caller. They want to run the ball. They want to play defense. A lot of their draft capital, a lot of their offseason moves, even their in-season moves last year in 2024 were focused on this defense. My other big problem too, Sam Darnold doesn't do well under pressure. The Seahawks are going to have a bottom 10 offensive line in 2025. We saw what he looked like at the end of the season with the Rams in that playoff game. Doesn't do well under pressure. I'm not rooting against Sam Darnold. I just don't think he's going to perform at the same level everybody else does. So I have to move JSN a little bit lower with all these factors considered, but still easily a top 24 wide receiver in fantasy football in 2025. So as my wide receiver 20, I have Mike Evans. I think he's going to be right around 1,000 yards, which again, safely puts him as a top 24 wide receiver in fantasy football. As my wide receiver 21, I have DK Metcalf. I think Aaron Rodgers last 6, 7, 8 weeks of the season with the Jets looked a lot better than he did at the beginning of the season, kind of shake the rust off a little bit. So DK Metcalf is going to be the red zone target if they're not trying to pound the ball into the end zone. He's going to be Rodgers' favorite guy. He's a big body wide receiver who still has some speed, still has some juice. I think that his connection with Rodgers will end up by midseason being very similar to how it was with the Devontae Adams. So that's why it's pretty easy for me to rank DK Metcalf as a wide receiver 21 overall. Again, I think he's a little bit higher in my rankings than for a lot of people out there, but I just like the situation. He's going to be the primary target earner, big body, fast wide receiver, playing with Aaron Rodgers, who I think is being not undervalued in fantasy football, but kind of like being put down and undervalued as far as an actual NFL quarterback goes. So I anticipate seeing DK Metcalf being a top 24 guy this coming season. I have Devontae Smith. Not really going to talk about him too long. Speedy guy on a good offense. Going to score a lot of points for the Eagles. Again, like I said with A.J. Brown, I think that you're going to see Saquon scale back to touches. Potentially could have an injury, miss a few games, whatever it is. Devontae Smith easily going to finish as a top 24 wide receiver in fantasy football. I have him dramatically higher than most people, but that is Jerry Jeudy. In 2025, I think we're going to see Joe Flacco anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks. I think that with him, Jerry Jeudy, and David Njoku to some extent, those are going to be your primary target earners for this football team. I do have faith that Jerry Jeudy, regardless of who the QB is on this team, is going to finish as a top 24 wide receiver in fantasy football in 2025. As my wide receiver 24 in my rankings, I have him a lot higher too, which is kind of crazy because he should be ranked a lot higher. Like, this was kind of a no-brainer for me, is Courtland Sutton. I think you are going to see Bo Nix in year 2. You are going to see Sean Payton in year 2 with Bo Nix as well. Sean Payton's brought in more weapons, more talent. This team offensively is going to be able to score the ball in bunches. He's going to be able to pick up where he left off last season. He's going to easily be able to finish as the top 24 wide receiver in fantasy football. The fact people have him ranked dramatically lower in some of their rankings is absolutely crazy to me because of how he ended up finishing last season. He's a guy who you can, again, just like Juwan Jennings, get later in your draft. Don't draft him at wide receiver 24. Draft him at where he's going. Just try and pick him before somebody else does. Don't get sniped on him. But he is a guy that I think who's easily going to finish as a wide receiver 2 for you in fantasy football in 2025. All right, guys, so there are my wide receiver rankings, my top 24 going into 2025. If you guys like this video, if you want to see a second part or part 2, I guess, rather, please let me know down in the comments. No stress if you don't. It's not the end of the world. We'll move on, move forward. Looking forward to the rest of the season. If you guys want to watch some of my other rankings videos, whether it's QBs, tight ends, running backs, they should be around here somewhere for you to watch, just so you guys can kind of get an idea of how I have people ranked at different positions. I will have content this coming season, which I really haven't talked about too much as far as like my schedule. It'll be Tuesday through Saturday. I'll be covering waiver wire pickups, positional rankings, who I think has favorable matchups, and kind of more of a team start sit and then an individual player start sit show as well. Kind of just trying to encapsulate all the different things that I think will help you get just a little bit closer to winning your fantasy football championship this coming season, during the season. Hopefully this video, much like those, help you get just a little bit closer to winning your fantasy football championship in 2025. Hopefully I'll see you guys again. No, hopefully you guys will see me again real soon. Until then, y'all have a blessed day. Bye.